So a couple of weeks ago, there was, it's actually already about a month ago, there was a op-ed about artificial intelligence, which caught my eye. We'll talk about it in a minute. But then just last week, there was a news item that was making its rounds about, and it's there on the sheet, world's first living robots can now reproduce, scientists say. US scientists who created the first living robots say the life forms known as xenobots can now reproduce in a way not seen in plants and animals. Formed from the stem cells of the African clawed frog, Xenopus levis, from which it takes its name, xenobots are less than a millimeter wide. The tiny blobs were first unveiled in 2020 after experiments showed that they could move, work together in groups, and self-heal. Now the scientists that developed them at the University of Vermont, Tufts University, and Harvard University's Wyss Institute for Biologically Inspired Engineering say they have discovered an entirely new form of biological reproduction, different from any animal or plant known to science. The xenobots are very early technology. Think of a 1940s computer, and don't yet have any practical applications. However, this combination of molecular biology and artificial intelligence could potentially be used in a host of tasks in the body and the environment, according to researchers. This may include things like collecting microplastics in the oceans, inspecting root systems, and regenerative medicine. While the prospect of self-replicating biotechnology could spark concern, the researchers said that the living machines were entirely contained in a lab and easily extinguished, as they are biodegradable and regulated by ethics experts. Famous last words. It's all in a lab and it will never get out. But this seems to be, quite literally a brave new world in which we live in, that we have robots that are now biologically reproducing. And what that means going forward is remains to be seen. But what we have here is certainly of this new possibility, that so far has mainly been in science fiction.
When they say not in a lab that will never get out, where have we heard that before?
Exactly. So it's kind of coming soon to a theater near you. But what this represents is a tremendous opportunity that, as they're talking about this regenerative medicine, maybe this can kind of like regrow limbs or skin or the like. And it's one further step forward in this whole realm of artificial intelligence. If we look around in the various headlines of progress or innovation today, we're often encountering things that are not natural. They're not necessarily even physical or tangible. I keep trying to figure out exactly what an NFT is, a non-fungible token. I know what it is, but how exactly does it work? The cryptocurrency, these are all things which are existing and are being innovating, but they're not the same way that we used to think of something. Money is, what's in your pocket. And, and reproduction comes from animals or humans. And all of a sudden we're entering a brave new world. And so it was that brave new world that was addressed in a Wall Street Journal op-ed last month. It was by Henry Kissinger, Eric Schmidt, and Daniel Huttenlocher. Henry Kissinger, I'm sure many have heard of. Eric Schmidt was one of the founders of Google, and Daniel Huttenlocher is a scientist at MIT. Right? So some fairly well-known individuals, personalities who are talking about the challenges of being human in the age of AI being artificial intelligence. So just a couple of snippets from that piece. The White House Office of Science and Technology Policy has called for a Bill of Rights to protect Americans in what is becoming an AI-powered world. The concerns about AI are well known and well-founded, that it will violate privacy and compromise transparency, and that biased input data will yield biased outcomes, including in fields essential to individual and societal flourishing, such as medicine, law enforcement, hiring, and loans. Right, all these calculations, which are sometimes made in all sorts of realms, can be left to the artificial intelligence without any human involvement. In 2017, Google DeepMind created a program called AlphaZero that could win at chess by studying the game without human intervention and developing a not quite human strategy. Right, we've always seen or heard or read about, the chess masters taking on the machines, and which one, machine finally beat it. I think it was Garry Kasparov, with the machine that was programmed was able to defeat a chess master. They actually quote Garry Kasparov in this op-ed, because here this was not a computer that was programmed. This was artificial intelligence that learned how to play chess and beat the chess master. In 2020, Halcyon, a novel antibiotic, was discovered by MIT researchers who instructed AI to compute beyond human capacity, modeling millions of compounds in days, and to explore previously undiscovered, unexplained methods of killing bacteria. Right? These are, we would call this meisim b'chol yom. These are things which can happen all the time in medical settings where you're encountering different bacterial infections, and that have become immune to antibiotics. So how can you figure out to create new antibiotics and new compounds? Well, sometimes you need beyond human capability. You need the capability of artificial intelligence. That leaves humans needing to redefine or to define or perhaps redefine our role in the world. For 300 years, the age of reason has been guided by the maxim, I think, therefore I am. But if AI thinks, what are we? If an AI writes the best screenplay of the year, should it win the Oscar? I don't know about you, but they always talk about, could a monkey write Shakespeare? Or did the bottle of ink spill and the words of Shakespeare come out? So no, but it could be artificial intelligence that could write poetry or a screenplay. If an AI simulates or conducts the most consequential diplomatic negotiation of the year, should it win the Nobel Peace Prize? Should the human inventors? Can machines be creative, or do their processes require new vocabulary to describe? If a child with an AI assistant comes to consider it a friend, what will become of his relationship with peers, or his social or emotional development? We're getting a taste of that, by the way. Young people or all people are connected to their phones. If an AI can care for a nursing home resident, remind her to take her medicine, alert paramedics if she falls, and otherwise keep her company, can her family members visit her less? Should they? If her primary interaction becomes human to machine rather than human to human, what will become the emotional state of the final chapter of her life? And if in the fog of war an AI recommends an action that would cause damage or even casualties, should a commander heed it? I think we may have mentioned before, it certainly came up that there was a piece in the New York Times in which Ronen Bergman, Israeli author and journalist, investigated Israel's assassination of an Iranian nuclear scientist. And you may have seen it, but the short version is that they had essentially a remote controlled car with a machine gun that was being controlled by military personnel in Israel, and pulling the trigger. But how do you compensate for any types of movements or even the millisecond time differential between pushing the button there and getting the signal into Iran? An artificial intelligence program compensated to ensure that it would be a direct hit. So that's in terms of military use. So it's a brave new world, and it's getting only braver in terms of, or newer, with regards to artificial intelligence. And we have some very deep questions. Some of them are more philosophical, some emotional, and some even halachic as to responsibility. Reactions or thoughts or questions on the subject before we dive into a couple of sources which can give some a Jewish Torah perspective. Feel free to unmute or put them into the chat. Certainly it gives new definition to who's in charge. So like a few weeks ago, where we saw that there were some sources in Talmud era sources that related to surrogacy or envisioning surrogacy. And we have some sources that envision this idea of artificial intelligence. And a very famous Gemara in Sanhedrin, where Rava said, we're looking at source number 2, if the righteous wish to do so, they can create a world, as it is stated, but your iniquities have separated between you and your God. In other words, there's no distinction between God and a righteous person who has no sins. And just as God created the world, so can the righteous. Rava created a man, a golem, using forces of sanctity. Rava sent his creation before Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Zera would speak to him, but he, the golem, would not reply. Rabbi Zera said to him, you were created by one of the members of the group, one of the sages. Return to your dust, and essentially deactivated or killed the golem. And, so we were familiar with the golem legends, the golem stories. The most famous golem is the Maharal of Prague created a golem, according to tradition or according to legend. It's a very colorful story, but we have the idea of a golem existing, and we have sources describing golems being created by different tzaddikim, in keeping with Rava's teaching that we have creative spiritual forces, and Rava in fact utilized those forces and created a golem, and Rabbi Zera deactivated or killed the golem. And so the question emerged in Jewish law: what is the status of a golem? Is a golem a person? And especially as it pertains to Jewish communal life, could the golem count in a minyan? Now that you could have someone who's standing around like a golem, not paying any attention, counting in a minyan. Hopefully, when we're in shul, we're more participatory. But what about a golem counting as the 10th in a minyan? This was a question that was raised, and it was discussed by the Chacham Tzvi, Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch ben Yaakov Ashkenazi, 17th century. He was in Amsterdam, and it seems that he was a descendant of grandson or great-grandson of one of the sages who created a golem. So here's his translation of Responsum number 93, source number 3. I've contemplated a person that is created by the means of the book of creation, Sefer Yetzirah, a Kabbalistic book, just like those described in Tractate Sanhedrin. Rava created a being. And also as witnessed by our elder Gaonim, my father and teacher, Rabbi Leo Baal Shem of Chelm. Can they be counted as part of a minyan for prayers that require 10 such as Kaddish or Kedusha? So we have an artificially created human being. Maybe it's like artificial intelligence. Is it human? Do we say that since the Torah says, I shall be sanctified within Bnei Yisrael, and the golem was not at Mount Sinai, and the golem isn't Jewish, it should not be counted, or perhaps you should be counted? Because it says, if you raise an orphan in the home, it's as if you've given birth to him. Since the golem is the product of the handiwork of the righteous, is considered generally part of Bnei Yisrael. Since it is made from the hands of the righteous, it is their descendant, right? You get credit for it. It's alive, it's active, it's there because of you. So you are the creator, and therefore it is just like any other child. So either it is not Jewish and not real, or it's real enough. What do you think? We should take a vote. Should we count the golem? Maybe if you're stuck at 9 for a while, maybe then you want to count the golem.
Is it a woman golem or a man golem?
It's interesting. It seems as if they're only able to create men golem.
As a woman, I'm very insulted. They won't count the woman.
No, so you shouldn't be insulted. It's no big deal to create men. Men are simple. Women are much more complicated.
Oh,
yeah, but they count trees for a minyan. They count golem for a minyan, but a woman is not countable.
So that's a separate conversation. But in terms of it's easy to create men. Men are simple. They're animalistic. Women are so much more complicated, right? Sugar and spice and everything nice. We're making a golem out of mud. Come on, Judy.
And today's connotation of golem, let it be a man. It's okay.
That's exactly. So I think that the Chacham Tzvi, when I heard the issue emerged, to me, it just seems natural that no, you shouldn't. It's a golem. It's a golem for a reason. But Chacham Tzvi entertains the possibility. But so he concludes, it seems to me that since Reb Zera killed it, right, since he said return to the dust, since he killed him. And he goes on to say that if you thought you could participate in the 10 things that require Kedusha, then he would not have removed it from this world. Right? This idea, the fact that he killed it shows that it can't be human, because if it was human, he wouldn't have been able to kill it. So if he was able to kill it, it's not human, it doesn't count in a minion. And that's essentially the way the Chacham Tzvi concludes. That, this is in the realm of essentially artificial intelligence, it's not human. So Dr. John Loike and Rabbi Moshe Tendler, Tendler passed away just a couple months ago. You often collaborated with John Loike in articles, in an article in Tradition some 18 years ago, right? They were talking about, where there was already conversations about, different types of cloning and in artificial creating and the types of things that we've started to address more practically these days. They said, we propose, according to halacha, a human being must possess at least one of the 3 characteristics: having been formed within or born from a human, expressing moral intelligence, being capable of producing offspring with a human. If you unpack these 3, it's very very specific and very on a certain sense limiting, because 18 years ago, they wanted to make sure that, look, if it was being able to produce offspring, well, if that was the criteria alone, then, well, guess what? AI may be able to be real. The golem may be real because they're producing offspring, but it has to be able to produce offspring with a human. Expressing moral intelligence, that's something more than just a scientific equation or mathematical equation, or been formed within or born from a human, right? And that's going to be important because, we're starting to see the, growing, at least, parts of animals, from cells, at some point, it's not unrealistic to think they will grow a human being. But from the perspective of Rabbi Tendler and Dr. Loki, that wouldn't be enough, because it has to grow from within or from a human. And so I think that that is a kind of a 21st century application of the discussion that starts in the Gemara and Sanhedrin, discussed by the Chacham Tzvi. Mishnah Brura, in practical halachic terms, also quotes the Chacham Tzvi. You can't count a golem in a minion. But we seem to be taking the conversation from the Gemara through the 17th century in theoretical terms to, as things become more practical, we have some sort of Jewish source halachic guidance for how to look at artificial intelligence, right? It has to be formed within a human, moral intelligence, and produce offspring with the human. And at least from the perspective of those 3 criteria, we're much further away from the question of whether artificial intelligence qualifies as things which are human. And Rabbi Yosef Tzvi Ramon, who spoke about these terms, and a lot of his comments were found in an article in the Orthodox Union's Jewish Action magazine last spring. He builds upon this because this idea of human intuition is kind of, and it's certainly subjective, but he talks about there's no question that AI is becoming increasingly sophisticated, is able to perform human activities with greater speed and efficiency, often at a lower cost. Nevertheless, computers are not infallible, and a doctor has something that AI lacks: human intuition. All right, there's that's this moral intelligence idea that Rabbi Tendler and Dr. Loki are talking about. There's a certain, you can't fully, a certain je ne sais quoi, you can't put your finger on it, but there's a difference between humans and machines. And I wonder if maybe Rav Rimon might be a little bit maybe optimistic or naive in terms of whether artificial intelligence will be able to mimic this human intuition. Certainly not feelings per se, but it's an open question. Rav Rimon does start to talk about there are things that machines can do, that human beings program them. But artificial intelligence, the way that it is let loose, is that it makes the decisions on its own. And Rabbi Rimon mentions a couple examples in halacha where it seems that it's not only the what's called koach gavra, that it's the force of the person, the personal touch, if you will, but it also has to be the decision of a human being that is required. And he points as one example in the realm of shchita, slaughter. Source number 6, if a Jew and someone who has been invalidated slaughter simultaneously is not allowed to be consumed. Right? The idea is if you have a Jew who is allowed to slaughter and someone who's been invalidated, either not Jewish or someone who is apikoros, someone who is a public sinner, right? You need someone who is religious to slaughter. So if a Jew and someone who's invalid are doing it together, well, you're not allowed to do it. Why not? Because you need the human touch to handle the slaughter. And if the human is being co-opted or there's a collaboration with an invalid source of the slaughtering, then the slaughtering is invalid. As a side note, this is also the Shulchan Aruch mentions that a monkey cannot slaughter because it can't be an animal. It has to be a human being. And so he points out that we see that there's a certain human independent human initiative that has to go into slaughter, that if it's impacted by something that's secondary, that's disqualified, then it's no good. So as he sees this as an indication that at least when it comes to slaughter, you would not be able to have artificial intelligence slaughter. The halacha does deal with a situation of a machine that, what happens if you, instead of it being the shochet takes the knife and does the slaughter, what if there's kind of a contraption that the shochet operates to do the slaughtering? So in Yoredei Siman Zion, number 171, second paragraph in source 6, a person may set a knife on a wheel of stone or wood that rotates by one's hand or foot and proceed with the contraption to the neck of the animal or fowl until it is slaughtered by turning the wheel, and it is acceptable. Right? If the person's operating the wheel, operating the machine directly, it's a valid mechanism of slaughter. You have to be very careful, and it's unless it's a very precise machine, it wouldn't work. If the water rotates the wheel and he places the neck of the animal opposite while it's turning, causing it to be slaughtered, it is unacceptable. It requires koach gavra, it requires the direct human operation of this. It can't just be the human being is doing the placing of the animal next to the wheel, which has the knife attached to it that's being turned by the water. Even though that's natural, it's not human. So it seems, Rabbi Rimon says, that there is an element of halachic understanding of the unique role of the independent human activity when it comes to slaughter that seems to limit the acceptability of machines sometimes, but certainly if the machine is not operated or initiated by a human being, which would therefore disqualify artificial intelligence from this type of operation. He then asked the question about, what about using artificial intelligence that, some of the examples, that in terms of investigating, what about supervising the kashrus in a restaurant? Or if we're staying on the slaughtering rule, slaughterer's knife has to be very sharp. What about having the machine check whether or not the knife is kosher? So when it comes to the laws of checking of the knife, it's the third paragraph in source number 6. The checking of a knife requires the use of the skin and fingernail from 3 angles. In other words, one must pass it over and draw it back over the flesh of his finger, and afterwards pass it back on one's fingernail from 3 angles, which are its tip and both of its sides, and so to ensure it will not have a blemish at all. After this, we check the knife slowly with full concentration, not turning one's mind to other things, and then repeat on another nail slightly to check. Requires a lot of personal touch, but not only personal touch, it requires significant concentration on the part of the one checking the knife. So so Rav Rimon says with regards to this, that maybe you could use the results of a mechanical or artificial intelligence investigation, but to tell if the knife is too dull, but it can't serve as the final arbiter because it seems to require various checkings, but also full intent, kavanah. And, so here we can see this as an example in shchita, in slaughtering, but we begin to see that Jewish law seems to require not only koach gavra, human initiative sometimes, but also requires kavanah, specific intent. And that intent, which is initiated from within the individual, is not possible, but based on the mathematical calculations that go into artificial intelligence. And so we can get a lot of benefit from artificial intelligence, but it may be complicated in areas of Jewish law that require human initiative, as well as complication with regard to those that involve independent thought and specific intent. Questions or comments before we look at a couple other areas of Jewish law in another realm of this? Yes, Miriam.
I don't want to get this off of a ridiculous tangent, but wouldn't it be so beneficial, and would it be allowed luckily to have IA inspect lettuce and vegetables? It would be a tremendous cost saver, and does that need human interaction, human koach?
Right. So I think that what Rav Rimon learns from the shchita example is that you could use technology significantly. I don't know exactly where the technology is just yet in terms of this type of checking, but there would have to be on some level somewhere there has to be human involvement. With checking, it's less about kavana, but then it is about, one of the things has to do with consequences. Who puts in one of the foundations of kashrus is the idea of how do you ensure that it be done properly. And, so in the kosher world, that's called mirtas. It's called the fear, basically, right? How does a mashgiach supervise? A mashgiach can't supervise every single activity. Mashgiach can supervise enough to make sure that no one does anything that would go against the rules of kosher. So how do you have to create an environment where the workers won't even think about bringing in a non-kosher alternative if they run out of an ingredient or the like, right? Unless because we don't require 24/7 coverage per se. Now, in the kosher industry, they do use a lot of video surveillance because they're still able to maintain that level of, there are consequences if policies aren't followed. I think that if they were able to set up a system that couldn't be tampered with, that had a certain threshold for ensuring that things were properly checked, I think it would be fine. I just wonder if I wonder if the system exists yet. I'm a reader of the subject, and taking it into a Jewish basis, I have no idea what would it take to have an AI mashgiach. Could be a wonderful project for some of our Torah Umada students to try and come up with something. It'll probably be expensive to initiate, but once it's out there, could be very helpful. But I think that they've started this process in terms of the way that the kosher agencies supervise plants all over the world, very often with very little personal oversight. Right? They don't have mashgichim in all the different plants and international. They do have some who travel so that they can ensure that there's a human touch. Because if it's all left to machines, people can get lazy or people can get careless. But I think it would be great. The same way that the same way that the knives can be scanned for problems with regard to the knives. You just need that shochet to give the all clear. I think they talk. Now they have computers that check tefillin and check Sifrei Torah and the like. To ensure that everything is done properly. Look, but just an example from that realm, there's something called the silk screen method of printing, And so they talk about what about making the silk screen Torah. So basically all you have to do is you put the screen down, you run the ink over it, and you make the whole page of a whole column of Torah writing. There are authorities, they're in the extreme minority, who have permitted something like that because it makes it easier. It also makes it a lot cheaper because a lot less time has to be invested, but it's not traditional. And I think it's a different realm, and I think if they would be able to find a way to set up the mechanism in place to have things checked, I think it's they'll find it'll be kind of, they sell Bodek, they'll now start selling like Bodek AI or something like that. So there's also this idea, when we talk about Rav Rimon introduced the idea that sometimes you require koach gavra, requires the initiative of the human being, and sometimes it requires the oversight of the human being. Sometimes it requires the intent of the human being. So this highlights that intent, has a certain substance, has a certain reality. So there's how does the Torah classify the thoughts that I have in my head? What, and the example would be that what happens if we reach a point that as the technology advances in such a way that it would be able to determine that usually the way these things have, these smart houses operate is it collects a lot of data as to what the rhythms of a person's activities are. It monitors what's in the refrigerator and what items get used regularly and what items you run out of. Right now, they'll have refrigerators that will notice that a certain item is running out, and it'll place the order automatically with the supermarket. It will deliver. It measures how long the lights are on, and if it's dimmer switches where you normally keep the lights, and what the temperature is. There are all sorts of ways that this can be that our actions can be analyzed and then can then be put together. So, but what about our thoughts? Like, what happens if we think something? So, Rav Rimon, source number 7. There are several Torah sources that define thought. One such source is found in Tosfot Masechet Gittin, which discusses separating Trumot and Maasrot by thought on Shabbat. Right, when you're supposed to tithe before Shabbat, you're not allowed to tithe on Shabbat because that's measuring something that's and setting aside something permanent in a way that's inappropriate on Shabbos. But what if you want to? Let's say the situation is you're confronted with food that may not have been tithed and you have to eat it on Shabbos. Can you tithe it in your mind? Can one actually separate Truma and Maasrot simply by thinking about it? Is thought considered action? So there is a machloket achronim, how to understand this Tosfot. According to Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, it is forbidden to separate Trumot and Maasrot in this manner on Shabbat. Thus, according to his view, thought is equivalent to action. So, what you have is that some of the technology that's out there, which is which may take into account our thoughts. It could be something that could be problematic on Shabbos. With regard, for example, there's a technology that's being developed called BCI, brain computer interface. Right, so they're trying to do incredible things about people who are paralyzed, be able to move robotic limbs, or people who aren't able to speak, to be able to think and be able to create words. How does that play out on Shabbos? So, Rav Rimon says it is a machlokes, but it's something that Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, based on the Talmud's discussion and Tosfot's understanding of thought, when it comes to separating the tithes, which is not our conversation, but says that since one's thoughts can accomplish something there, it could be problematic here. And so, Rav Rimon goes on to talk about that. He thinks that the BCI could be problematic on Shabbos except in cases of great need or urgency, or for people who have it if need it for a medical reason. What about intent? What about, remember, some of the stuff we don't, getting back to the physical examples about walking into rooms and having our, we walk into a room, we don't want the temperature to change. We don't want the lights to change. It's just that the technology knows what's going on and does it for us. So there's a discussion in the Talmud in Beitza about what's called davar she'eino miskaven, something that you don't intend. Source number 8, Rabbi Shimon says a person may drag a bed, a chair, or a bench on the ground, providing he does not intend to make a furrow. This is on Shabbos. Even if one forms a furrow unwittingly, one need not be concerned, as this was not his intention. This is Rabbi Shimon's view, in which he says a davar she'eino miskaven. If you don't intend to it, you're not liable for Shabbos. Now, in the end of the day, you may not be liable, but it's still forbidden. But there is an idea that for something that you don't intend, you're not liable on Shabbos. So for example, this comes up sometimes if you're walking by somewhere and the light turns on automatically on Shabbos. Do you have to go out of your way or not? And so there's different opinions, but there's certainly a strong position which says if you don't want the light to turn on, you really don't get benefit from that light going on. When you're walking in that place, you don't have to go out of your way, and you can just keep walking along the way, utilizing this idea of Rabbi Shimon. Even if we don't say, if you have no intent, it's perfectly okay. So Rav Rimon applies this to artificial intelligence sensors. Source number 9. The fact that AI sensors are continually learning about you, even as you move around your home on Shabbat, does not necessarily constitute a violation of Shabbat, since it is an unintended consequence of your action. However, suppose you go downstairs to your kitchen on Shabbat morning, and after a few minutes, the shutters suddenly open. The coffee maker begins preparing coffee because your smart home recognizes that that particular time and temperature you like the shutters open and coffee ready. That would be problematic. This is because AI is doing the forbidden malacha as a result of your activity. And it kind of opens up a whole discussion as to certain things which may even be permitted. Is it taking away from the soul and the spirit of Shabbos? And this has been a conversation going on for ages. The whole idea of using a Shabbos goy, a non-Jew, to turn on lights on Shabbos, or timers have turned the conversation into how far can we go in even permissible things if it's not going to feel like Shabbos, and we shouldn't underestimate the need for that type of a feeling. So we see that artificial intelligence is a brave new world that's getting even newer and braver. At the same time, that halachic sources do give us some indication of how to manage and balance with regards to things like do we need human initiative or human effort or human thought or kavana or intent, and the fact that thought can sometimes be considered something valid or within Jewish law, and therefore is something that we need to be concerned with on Shabbos, as well as some general definitional issues in terms of what is considered human or living for Jewish purposes, and how AI so far is not. The last area I want to touch on is could probably be a class unto itself, but it's just so fascinating. I want to at least put it out there. Has to do with a question revolving autonomous driving vehicles. And if you are in a car that's driving itself that damages or gets into an accident or the like, whose fault is it? And this is something that obviously, as these types of cars are more common out there, is going to have to be dealt with from a liability perspective. From a halachic perspective, there's also a discussion. At the end of the day, halacha has different categories of damage. Sometimes you damage it directly, or sometimes you facilitate it. So if the car is yours, you're somehow connected to the damage that gets caused, because either if a person is doing the driving and they're at fault, they cause the damage. If their property causes damage, right? The Talmud is full of examples of oxen and sheep that gore each other or fall or fight and the like. But one of the other issues that comes up is that is not necessarily not only the ownership or utilization of these autonomous vehicles, right? But how do they come about, right? How do they work? And they work with artificial intelligence. They work that there is a program that has to set in place all the various, like how does it change lanes or speed up or slow down, Right? All of this is requires programming, but it's not a program that can cover all of the possibilities, because there's an infinite number of possibilities that arise while driving a car. It's artificial intelligence that's in place that then the car will then think. But that car has to be programmed, at least set in motion on how to think. In one case, it has to do with the fact that, let's say there's something that goes wrong in the car or on the road, and there's for whatever reason there's a dangerous situation. Someone stopped short. There's the situation is that you keep going straight, you're going to plow into a whole bunch of pedestrians, but if you veer, you're plowing into one pedestrian. And this is actually a very famous train experiment or trolley experiment, philosophically speaking, right? That there's 5 people that are tied to the train track, and you can move the train, but there's one person tied on that side. Do you let the train continue to kill the 5, or do you turn the train to kill 1 and not kill 5? So this is a thought experiment and a values experiment. Halachically, it's also an experiment because we're not allowed to murder. And one where if the train is going to kill people, but if you turn the switch, you're going to kill people. So it's a fascinating conversation. But the same thing can be applied to what's happening with the autonomous vehicle, and who's programming the autonomous vehicle, and what does someone who's worried about the halacha, what can they do in this situation? Halacha didn't deal with autonomous vehicles, but there's an interesting source of the Ramah, source number 10, that hayom roen nezek ba'alav, if there's damage, you're in danger of being damaged. Mutar lahatzil atzmo afal pi sha'ayidei zeh nezek li'acher. You can save yourself even if someone else will get damaged. Again, we're talking damage, not killing, right? In terms of saving life, we're talking about damage. So, but the Ramah introduces an idea that to protect yourself isn't necessarily going to be a clean zero-sum, everyone's fine game. You can protect yourself even if someone else gets hurt. And this is a source that gets in, that's part of the calculus among those who tries to figure out what can happen. So just source number 11, Rabbi Yosef Sprung, who wrote an article on the development of the autonomous vehicle. Programming the car in a neutral environment, free of the exigencies of the road, and giving preference to the safety of the many cannot be thought of as a directive to murder, but as an expression of the imperative to save lives. Right? He begins to take this idea that if you are programming the car to save the many, even if it may end up killing the one, that's not murder, that's keeping safety in mind, keeping protection in mind. That's the overarching principle. And so Rabbi Sprung feels that someone who is following halach is allowed to be involved in the programming of these autonomous vehicles. Suffice it to say, maybe we'll cover this in another class more in depth. There are those who disagree and say you can't go down this path. You can't program, because if you set in motion this type of a program that in theory would instruct the car to kill the one to save the many, you're a murderer. So it's definitely a brave new world in this realm as well. I don't know how many people here are driving autonomous vehicles. Again, for the driver, it's more about, from a halachic perspective, who's responsible for some of these things. But there's also this idea in terms of, what is the role of being involved in the initiation of some of these things. And here's an example where that could be problematic. To program the car to do this type of thing may be, in a sense, hopefully God forbid never comes to it, but could be problematic in that it comes to violating murder in this type of a situation. So we have a whole new world in which we can navigate. There could be some good things, like our kashrus could get better. We can check Torahs better. We might have sharper knives for slaughtering and in other things. And there's certainly quality of life situations which can be significantly improved. We'll have to balance that with some of the other areas where human initiative is needed, and Shabbos and the like. But that's but on some level, some of these things aren't really all that new. The underlying principles we can still find some direction from our tradition.